Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for this very kind invitation to be here and to address you at chapel here at Biola University. As Scott mentioned, as Dr. Ray mentioned, the mission I'm the president and founder of the Ruth Institute, and the mission of the Ruth Institute, we used to describe it this way. We used to say that our mission was to promote lifelong married love to college students and other young adults by creating an intellectual and social climate favorable to marriage. That's what we used to say. But we figured out we weren't getting enough done fast enough. So no offense to you guys, but we've branched out a little bit. But in the meantime, I want you to just be aware that we have a goldenrod yellow sheet that will allow you, if you wish, to sign up to be part of the Ruth Institute's newsletter, electronic newsletter. Everything's electronic. And so if you'd like to do that, we're going to be circulating those sheets around whenever the people think is appropriate to do that, okay? So as I mentioned, we felt that we weren't really getting enough done fast enough because of some of the kind of setbacks that marriage has had in the political and legal spheres. I'm thinking of problems at the ballot box where marriage, for the first time in 2012, marriage was on the ballot in different places and natural marriage was overturned by the voters, and that had never happened prior to 2012. Up until then, we'd had a consistent a string of wins in that area. But most of all, really, are the disastrous Supreme Court rulings in the past June, the Windsor case and the Prop 8 case. What the court did not say, we're going to impose same-sex marriage on the entire country in one fell swoop. That would have been sort of like a Roe v. Wade strategy of saying we're going to change everybody's laws instantly overnight. They did not do that. But what they did was to do a rolling Roe v. Wade. In other words, they put into motion a set of legal arguments which will, within a few years, result in come to the same result. Having all of that happen, we had to assess our use of time and say, are we really doing the best that we can do in terms of defending and explaining and promoting the institution of marriage and all of marriage, not simply dealing with the gay marriage issue, which is what everybody usually wants to talk about. So now we've come to the conclusion, after a lot of soul searching, we've come to the conclusion that what we need to do is to focus a little bit less on the intellectual and academic. Because honestly, if these battles were about reason and evidence, we would have won a long time ago, okay? So it's not about reason and evidence, and that's kind of a bitter blow for me to accept because I really like arguments. You know, I really like figuring stuff out and getting data and stuff. And I didn't bring charts or anything, even though I have PowerPoint. I could have brought charts, but you know, a good graph or table of numbers, I mean, that makes my heart beat fast, you know? So, but nobody cares. It's pretty much what I figured out, is that nobody cares. And so at the Ruth Institute, we are now focused more on the emotional and the spiritual, because I think this is where the battle is really being fought, which is not to say that you ignore the intellectual and go stupid on yourself. Of course, you have to continue to not lose your mind, but we have to address the spirit and the heart as well as the head. And so now our mission statement sounds a little bit different. It's a little more casual, you might say, but I think it comes to the point. Our mission now is to clean up the mess of the sexual revolution. That's basically it. The whole mess, right? Now, that sounds like an impossible task, and in a certain way it is, but we have a strategy for doing that, and our strategy is that we want to focus on the victims of the sexual revolution. We want to focus on the victims of the sexual revolution for some strategic reasons, which I'll explain as we go along. But first of all, let me just mention a few groups of people who could be reasonably considered victims of the sexual revolution. First, right off the top, the children of divorce. The children of divorce have been victimized by the whole ideology around no-fault divorce. And tomorrow's chapel will be exclusively on the subject of no-fault divorce, so I'm not going to talk too much about that right now. But I think it's pretty obvious that a lot of people have been wounded by that particular set of policies. Children have never really been heard from about what they thought about it. Right, we hear about what the adults think, and we now actually have tons of social science evidence that shows that divorce has been harmful to children. The vast majority of divorces are harmful to children. There are some exceptions to that where there's serious dysfunction in the family and so on, but the vast majority of divorces don't involve that, right? And so the vast majority of divorces actually are harmful to children. And so the children themselves need the opportunity opportunity to speak and need to have somebody speak for them and to say that they matter and what happened to them matters. Another group that you may have not heard identified before is a group that I call the reluctantly divorced. The reluctantly divorced. Now think about that. Most divorces take place against the wishes of one of the parties. All right, and because you have no-fault divorce usually means unilateral divorce. What that means is one party can end the marriage for any reason or no reason and never have to offer an account of themselves. And that means there's a person maybe who wanted to stay married, and the government takes sides with the person who wants the marriage the least. That's our idea of freedom somehow, okay? So the government's taking sides with the adulterous spouse or the person who wants to leave just because they're fed up or something, you know? So that's another whole group of people who have never even been given a name. So I give them a name, the reluctantly divorced. And by some estimates, 3/4 of divorces involve a reluctant spouse. That's amazing when you think about it. Another class of people that are victims of the sexual revolution, this is a group that's coming down the pike at us, I would call the donor-conceived persons. The donor-conceived persons have a whole list of issues, a whole set of things that are of concern to them that no one is listening to, that no one is taking seriously. So that's another whole group of people kind of coming at us. We could think of many victims of the hookup culture. Many people are victimized by the hookup culture, and again, we could do a whole talk on that subject of people who have been lied to and victimized and who were expecting something that didn't really work out the way they were led to expect that it would work out. So all of those are victims of the sexual revolution. But there's one group in particular that I want to focus on today. As I say, each one of those groups could have and in fact deserves a lecture of their own. A whole talk on their own to spell out just how this happened and why nobody's paying attention to it. But today I want to talk about another group. It's again a group that has never had a name before, as far as I know. We invented this name. And that is the group that I call the heartbroken career woman. The heartbroken career woman. Now, who am I talking about there? I'm talking about the woman who has it all, who has an advanced degree perhaps, who perhaps is very accomplished, who has a good job, a profession, maybe very well fixed financially. Maybe she's married, but she has no children, or she has one child. She has fewer children than she wanted because she postponed everything for the sake of her career. Who is she? She is a lot of people. There are a lot of people. Quite often I give this talk and I see people nodding their heads out there in the audience. A lot of people know somebody who fits this description. But the other reason I want to talk about this group is because this is my story. This is my story. I am one of these heartbroken career women. So let me just tell you a little bit about that. As Scott mentioned, my doctorate is in economics, which is kind of an unlikely subject to be ending up talking about the kinds of things I'm talking about. What he didn't mention is that, because he didn't know, I'm kind of holding out on him, you're going to hear this whole story, which may be more than you wanted to hear, but I started off my life as a cradle Catholic. I was brought up in a pre-Vatican II Catholic household. I went to Catholic school, which means that in 4th grade, I memorized the entire Baltimore Catechism. For those of you who don't know what the Baltimore Catechism is, for philosophy majors will be interested to know that the Baltimore Catechism is basically the Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas for children, which is kind of an audacious thing to do, okay? So there are a lot of people walking around with Thomism in the furniture of their minds, you know, in this kind of rudimentary way. But, you know, it actually works. I draw on that a lot. But anyway, it didn't work when I needed it because I stopped paying attention to it. What happened was that the sexual revolution hit. And we all thought it was going to be a lot of fun to have sex without babies. You know, everybody thought that was going to be a lot of fun. And in fact, in my childhood, there was a lot of conflict in our household. You know, there was a lot of quarreling and ill feeling and jealousy and shame, a lot of shame in the household of the 1950s and 60s, early 60s, a lot of that. And so when the sexual revolution hit, I thought, wow, this is my chance to get out, right? And so I did a very intelligent thing. I married the first man who asked me. How's that for an intelligent plan? Okay, I moved in with my boyfriend, and then we decided to get married, and we got married in the Catholic Church, and the priest looked at me and said, you know, I don't really think this is a very good idea. And so after the marriage, I basically stormed out of the church and said, I'll never enter another Catholic church again as long as I live, because I was so mad at that priest. Of course, the priest was right. Okay, even my 14-year-old sister could figure out that this was not going to work, but, you know, okay, so there I was. I knew it all. See, this is the thing. We knew it all. This is a kind of Gnosticism that is the undercurrent of our whole culture, by the way, right? A little Gnosticism floating around here. We all have the secret knowledge. We all know better than God, you know. Anyway, So anyway, I got married. I started pursuing a doctorate in economics, which I thought was going to be great. And it was, in many respects, it was great. But by 24, I was divorced. I met my next husband at the University of Chicago at the Students for Libertarian Society New Students Night. Okay, so that was where I was headed intellectually, was down the kind of libertarian path. And eventually we married in 1984. And and when we married, I'm sorry, Scott, I don't want to completely spoil your credibility here, but the guy we picked out to marry us was a libertarian friend of ours who had formed a tax-dodging church, and he did our wedding ceremony dressed in his Cambridge gown, you know, so he looked sort of ministerial and so on. And we wrote our own vows, and we quoted John Stuart Mill and the whole thing, you know. So I have to laugh at this, otherwise it would just be too embarrassing, right? So anyway, so I had it all worked out what I was going to do, you see. I was married, which in those days you had to be married before you had kids, okay? So I had it all worked out. I was going to get tenure at George Mason University. Once I got tenure, I was going to have a baby at the beginning of the summer. I was going to put the baby in daycare in September, and I was going to go right back to work in September. See, that was the plan. You guys are supposed to laugh. That's a joke. That was a laugh line, okay? I had this all worked out, right? That I had it all scheduled, see? And, but imagine my surprise when the baby did not arrive during the month that I had set aside for it. You know, surprise, okay. Well, it turns out, of course, that God had his own plan, which was, you know, like not now, right? And of course, I still hadn't ever been back to a Catholic church in all that time, but this experience, the experience of infertility, this was the experience that brought me to my knees. Because this was the first time in my adult life that I couldn't get what I wanted by following the rules and being the smartest person in the room. And so I thought I was entitled to get everything I wanted if I did those things. And this was the first time that it wasn't true. And so I found myself back in church. I found myself back in the sacraments. I found myself getting an annulment of my first marriage. And I found myself getting remarried with my dear husband, who's still not a Catholic, but who very graciously wanted to remarry. When I wanted to do this, we remarried. And so I've been married twice, actually. So don't ask me when my anniversary is. That's a long story. So that was what God did to me through infertility, which is obviously a path one would never choose for oneself. It's a path of grace because you don't choose that, right? And so we resolved our infertility. After about 4.5 years, we decided that we would adopt a child from Romania. This was in 1991. Eastern Europe was just opening up. Perhaps you remember, what that was like a little bit, you know. It was all very exciting that these kids were available now because the Berlin Wall had gone down. And so we put in our paperwork to adopt a child from Romania. And in January of 1991, so you can tell very early after all that happened, January 1991, we got a phone call saying, we have a little boy for you. He'll be 2.5 years old when you get him. What do you say? We know his name, we know his birth date. He's described as being in good health. What do you say? We said, sure, why not? When you've been infertile for 4.5 years, you don't really believe a baby's actually going to show up. So it was cheap to say, oh, sure, send us a little boy, that's great. So 10 days later, I went to the doctor with a head cold, and I found out that I was pregnant. So we had 2 children in 6 months' time, which is a record even for a Catholic. And that's how I knew I was back in the faith, you see. I was kind of getting back in the swing of things, But So the experience of raising those two children is something that I have talked about in other lectures. I talked about in Love and Economics, my first book, which we have all over our website at the Ruth Institute. I talk about that experience of raising these two children for this reason. This was an experience that showed us just how much children need their mothers and fathers. Because think about this. We had two children 6 months apart, but they were 3 years apart in chronological age. But in psychological age, they were about the same age, right? In a certain way, they're about the same age. And our little boy had been through so much that it took a lot of very concerted effort to make up for what he lacked in those first 2.5 years of really profound neglect. And so, for my husband and I, me in economics, okay, I'm telling you, nothing in my economics training prepared me for what I had to deal with there, okay? Will anyone here admit to being an econ person? Do we have any econ people? Dang. Okay. Okay. Well, so I was not prepared. My husband is an engineer, if anything, less prepared. Okay, so there's the two of us, a pair of nerds, basically. And nerd is a good thing, okay, let's be clear. Nerd is a good thing. There's the two of us. Basically, we look at these two kids, and what we see, naturally, is a controlled experiment, right? And the experiment is, what difference does it make whether you have a mom and dad in your life? What difference does it make if you have a mom and dad in your life? And obviously, it makes an enormous difference. It makes all the difference, right? And so that experience is what propelled me into the whole realm of study that I'm now involved in and have given my life to, which is the study of the family, the social significance of the family, and all the rest of the social issues, what we're now calling the social issues, but which are really the foundational issues of any society. That's what propelled me into it. But the reason I'm telling you this story today is because I want you to understand that this issue of being a heartbroken career woman is one that I understand very well firsthand. I take full responsibility for the decisions that I made and for the things that I did. As you can see, I'm quite, I'm repentant enough that I can speak it truthfully in front of you without collapsing in a heap, which normally that's not normal, right? I mean, you have to really know you're forgiven to be able to speak the truth about your own sins. I mean, isn't that the truth? There's nothing natural about admitting you were wrong. Actually, we have a tremendous resistance to ever admitting that we're wrong. But anyway, so the point is, we were lied to. That's the point, is we were lied to. Our whole generation of women, we were lied to. You are still being lied to. That's why you didn't laugh right away. Okay, when I made that joke about how I had my whole career thing planned out, when I say that to an audience of all adults or business people or something like that, they bust a gut right on the site. It's like, guffaw, guffaw, they think that's hysterical. You guys, a lot of you have that plan. A lot of you are still thinking that plan might work, okay? And so I'm telling you, it's a lie, okay? We're all still being lied to. After all this evidence, after all this experience, we still haven't got it? We still don't get it? There's something wrong there. Let me give you another example of this very same issue. My daughter, the daughter that I mentioned, the birth daughter that we had in 1991, who was born in October, she just graduated from Berkeley. She was president of Students for Life. She kept her faith up there, okay? So don't worry about that. My daughter went to Berkeley. It's all good. It's all good. In her experience there, she took a graduate level class in demography. Now, in demography, one bit of the subject matter is infertility or fertility. You can take a whole class on fertility in a demography class. And so she's sitting in the graduate level class with a female professor, and most of the grad students are female. And periodically they'd make these kind of wisecracks about Catholics and Mormons and their big families, and don't they know what causes that, and so on and so forth. And my daughter would just be kind of like this, because my daughter's best friend is one of 9 children, so my daughter's like this. Anyway, but one day, the professor lets the following fact slip. The professor says, I've had infertility problems. I only have 1 child. And oh, by the way, every woman faculty member I know has only 1 child, or maybe 2, and they've all had infertility treatments. And oh, by the way, you girls pursuing your doctorates, you can look forward to infertility treatments too. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. Think about that for a minute. Infertility is considered a normal part of an educated woman's career path. This is crazy. So think about it. I want you to just think about this. The deal that we were offered as modern women, the feminist deal, we were told, gosh, you can participate in higher education. You can participate in the workforce. But you have to agree to do a couple of things. You have to agree to chemically neuter yourself during your 20s, during your peak childbearing years. And then during your 30s, when you're socially and economically ready for children, you have to go through infertility treatments that are expensive, humiliating, and possibly dangerous. That's the deal that we're offering you. In other words, we're going to take the economic system as given and tell you ladies to adapt your bodies to the economic system. I say, why not take our bodies as given and adapt the economic system to us? What would be so wrong with that, right? So, but this has been part and parcel of the sexual revolution. This is what the sexual revolution has given to women. It is not a pro-woman result. In fact, it's inhuman. It's inhuman to ask that of us. So let me define this term that I've been throwing around, the term, the sexual revolution. Let me tell you what I mean by the sexual revolution and how it encompasses not just this issue, but the many issues that I brought up at the beginning. I define the sexual revolution as having two parts. The first part is it's the separation of sex and childbearing from each other and both from marriage. It's the separation of sex and childbearing from each other and from marriage. So in the Christian conception of marriage, and indeed in every known society, everybody has something like marriage. And what does marriage do? It's the umbrella for socially approved sexual contact and childbearing, right? It's the umbrella that unites and unifies all of those things. But the sexual revolution broke those pieces apart. Okay, and if you look at the different policies that are considered parts of the sexual revolution, you can see they all have to do with somehow severing one of those unities or another. So what I want to say about this is that it's a very seductive idea. And this is one of the things we have to confront as Christians. We have to confront the fact that the sexual revolution is a very seductive idea. We all thought it was going to be a lot of fun to have sex without having babies. And so, yeah, let's do it. That'll be great. But now we're to the point where we're having babies without having sex, which I'm pretty sure is not as much fun as the old-fashioned way. And what that indicates is a retreat from relationship. You see, a retreat from human relationship. And the IVF industry illustrates it the most dramatically in a way. You're having babies without ever having an actual encounter with another human being, which would be the normal, natural, God-given way that it's supposed to be done. So this first idea of the sexual revolution, that you can separate sex and babies from each other and both from marriage, this is a seductive but flawed idea. It is attractive but flawed. The second idea is the idea that men and women are completely interchangeable. Men and women are completely interchangeable. There is no significant difference between men and women. Anything you observe that seems to be a difference between men and women is all socially constructed and certainly suspect, or worse than suspect, okay? That's the second idea. Now this too is seductive in a way. There's a certain appeal to it. It appeals to our sense of equality and fairness and so on, but it's deeply flawed. Deeply flawed because in fact, men and women are different. And it's a shocking thing to go onto a campus and say that, to go to a secular campus and say that. You know, it's probably how I got on some of those lists that Dr. Ray was mentioning. And this idea, too, that men and women are interchangeable, this is part of the idea that leads to the heartbroken career woman. Because this is the idea that says for a woman to be successful, she must get on the same career path that the man's on. Forgetting that the career path was designed for people who don't have babies, namely men. That would be men who don't have babies. Just to brush up on our basic biology here. We're putting ourselves on a career path designed for people who don't have babies, right? And so what is the result? We're miserable. A lot of the most accomplished people in society are in fact miserable. And so the only coherent alternative to the sexual revolution, I believe, is the ancient Christian teaching on marriage, sex, and the family. The ancient Christian teachings, in fact, are the most coherent alternative, the only coherent alternative that I know of. It's where all the moving parts actually fit together and make sense, okay? And so actually I have another talk that I sometimes give called "The Church Has Been Right All Along." You know, that's my apology to that poor priest who ran me out of the church against my, anyway, I mean, he was right, that's the point. But anyway, I don't want to make it sound like it's a Catholic thing, because the Catholic Church, it is the teaching of the Catholic Church, but in fact, it is the ancient teaching of all of the Christian churches right up until about 5 minutes ago. This is what everybody believed. This is what everybody taught. And so this is our common heritage, and I think we need to recognize it and gather around it. Now, the next thing I want to say about the sexual revolution and its victims is that these two premises that I have outlined are both fatally flawed, as I mentioned, and therefore trying to build a society around them is irrational. It's impossible. It's impossible to build a society around the premise that sex does not make babies. That's crazy. It's crazy to try to build a society around the premise that men and women are completely interchangeable in every important respect. And so what happens is that when evidence of those things comes up, we have to suppress it. We have to tap it down. So when a lot of women are saying, oh my gosh, my biological clock is ticking, I really want a baby, we have to kind of do something to make her feel like there's something wrong with that. So that she shouldn't be having maternal feelings. It's awkward for girls to say, my goal is I want to have kids. I want to get married and have kids. She's got to apologize for that in a lot of settings, all right? There was a Time magazine article not too long ago, cover story, said the child-free life. The child-free life. What was that about? There was no new information in the article. There was nothing in the story. It was a puff piece. And what was it? It was, in my opinion, a piece of propaganda. A piece of propaganda designed to keep people remembering that sex can be separated from babies and that you'll be happy, by golly, if you don't have any babies. That's what that was about. It was propaganda. Now, the other thing that it takes is not just a lot of mind games, a lot of propaganda and pressure on us to let go of all these things that kind of keep flowing up out of us from the body, as it requires a lot of force. It requires actual force to try to create a society where sex doesn't make babies and where men and women are identical. So, I don't know how familiar you guys are with this, but we have the specter now of the Health and Human Services contraceptive mandate as part of the Affordable Care Act. As part of health care, there's a requirement that every single insurance policy must offer contraception, abortifacients, and sterilization with zero copay. That's considered preventive care, okay? Now, I just want you to notice what that is. No matter what you think about any of those things, I don't want to get into the theology of contraception. If you guys, I'm not going to tell you to throw away your pills or whatever. I'm not going there. I just want you to notice one little word here, is the word mandate. We do not have the HHS contraceptive suggestion. We do not have the HHS contraceptive option. We have the HHS contraceptive mandate, meaning dissent from the sexual revolutionary ideology must be crushed. The little sisters of the poor, who are celibate women, have to have contraception in their health insurance plan. And they take care of old people who are kind of beyond needing contraception. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. It only makes sense if you see that what they're trying to do is to enforce an ideology that cannot stand on its own, an ideology that has to be continually propped up. Now, as I mentioned, I could give similar talk for all the other victims of the sexual revolution, and tomorrow I'll give one on the victims of divorce. I'll talk about that. But I chose this heartbroken career woman not only because it's my story, but because I fear it could be your stories, and I want to kind of warn you off of it a little bit, at least give you something to think about before you go headlong. And so I want to explain a bit of why the Ruth Institute has been focusing on the victims of the sexual revolution. Because I believe that suppressing the victims, suppressing the voices of the victims, has been a crucial part of what has allowed the sexual revolution to continue on. Right? In other words, if we had ever taken responsibility for what these victims have experienced, if we had ever looked at it and said, wow, maybe we took a wrong turn here, let's try something else. Gee, maybe there's another way we can get women into the workforce without all of this stuff, Maybe there are other things we could be doing instead of what we're doing. If we did that and took seriously the victims and what they have been through, sexual revolution would have run out of steam a long time ago. So it's very important that people who have been wounded, who have been injured, have the opportunity to speak the truth. It's very important that you tell your stories, whatever your stories may be. It's very important that you tell your stories. It's very important that we name the victims so that they understand who they are and what has happened. And so I think that releasing them to tell the truth is a key part of overcoming a lot of what we're dealing with. And if you think about it, a lot of people who have been harmed by the sexual revolution can't even tell the truth, even inside their own families. A lot of times there's pressure to keep quiet. If something has happened inside the family, and I'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow when I talk about divorce, but you can think about the fact that a lot of times people are trying to protect their parents, or they're trying to protect the person who did something wrong to them, rather than come out and say, it was awful for me, or this isn't working. There's a lot of pressure to keep quiet. Or another whole area where this is true, where we have now some experience, is the whole issue of post-abortive women. Okay, many of you who are involved in the pro-life movement have seen that the Silent No More campaign has been very effective. The I Regret My Abortion campaign has been very effective. For years, many of those women were told by therapists and even clergy sometimes that the pain they felt had nothing to do with their abortion, and that they should be quiet, and they should not be giving solace to those crazy right-wingers, and that a lifetime of silence is the price you pay for your right to choose. That's what they've been told. And so it's time for the victims to speak. And that's what we're trying to get done at the Ruth Institute. So I hope that what I've said here today has maybe made you a little bit angry. That maybe just angry enough to do something about it. Because when we're content, we don't do anything. Angry that nobody's ever taken responsibility for the structural problems that we have in our society. Angry that the elites of our society are pressing new rounds of the sexual revolution and new rounds of victims, creating new rounds of people that will be victimized. But in addition to being angry, I want you to be a little angry, but I also want you to be awestruck. I want you to be proud of being a Christian. I want you to be in awe of our God, because our God, the God of the universe, let's face it, the only God there is. Don't you hate it when people talk about between a woman and her God? What are we talking about here? There's one God. The God of the universe brought the whole universe into being as an act of love. God created the world out of nothing as an act of love. And every single person in this room, every single person who has ever existed, has existed because God willed them and loved them into existence. Every one of us is loved into existence. And it's God's plan for us that we as humans participate in his life-giving love, so that the sexual act is meant to be life-giving love. That's meant to be the source of the human person. One time I had a debate on a campus, and I said, sex makes babies. And the lady said, no, it doesn't. What? Oh, says I, what do you mean? Unprotected sex makes babies. Oh, I see. Babies are created by contraceptive failure. Wait a minute. So our position is that nobody here came about as a result of a condom slip. Everybody here came about as a result of love. God's love for you, no matter how crazy your parents might have been, right? Because a lot of our parents did crazy stuff to bring us into being. Okay, we'll go with that. This is not new. That's not a new thing. But every single person exists because God loved them into existence, because God wants them to be here. And God's plan for us, God's hope for us, God's wish for us is that every act of sex be a life-giving act between two people who love one another. That's what it's about. That's so every single person can come into being as a result of the love of his natural parents, as well as the result of the love of a God. And it's actually kind of interesting and kind of cool that not every act of sex makes a baby. Have you ever think about that? There's a big random component, right? We all know that. It doesn't happen every single time. That's actually kind of cool, because it means that we're not robots. We're not mechanical. We're not in charge of the whole thing. God gets a vote. And even when we think we're in charge of the whole thing, even when we're in the IVF clinic, not every baby brought into being through IVF actually makes it, right? I mean, sometimes by human action, which is gross, but sometimes they just don't all make it, right? So even when we think, have you ever heard of anybody who did IVF successfully on the first try? I'm sure it's happened sometimes, but usually that's not how it works. There's a lot of trial and error there. So even there where we think we're in the driver's seat the most, God gets a vote. And so every single one of us has been loved into existence by God. And God wants us to create a social system that will honor that by having our love be the source as well of every single person coming into being. And so I hope that you will be awestricken by this reality of God's creation and God's design for this. I hope that you will be proud to be a Christian. I hope that you won't go around hanging your head, slinking around, acting like we're cavemen or something, and there's something wrong with us. The fact is, the sexual revolution is leading us into barbarism. That's the fact. And so I hope that we'll all be in awe of what God has made and take seriously our charge and our responsibility to guard that deposit of faith. And so I'd like to ask you to do two things, if I may. One is to sign that yellow piece of paper that's been going around if you'd like to get more information and be part of our new social movement that we're trying to create of remembering the victims, of supporting the victims of the sexual revolution. And then finally, online, you can go to the ruthinstitute.org. We have a petition up there that's called Remember the Victims of the Sexual Revolution. Remember the victims of the sexual revolution. So if you go to ruthinstitute.org, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a place where it says sign the petition. You can go there and sign the petition. If you read the petition closely, and I hope you will, you'll see it's a petition to a Roman Catholic Archbishop. That's okay. Anyone can sign it. We need everyone to sign it, because the bishops are about to do something, and they need to know that everybody cares what gets done, right? That they need to know that everybody's worried about the victims of the sexual revolution. So it's actually very powerful if non-Catholics sign the thing. So I'd urge you to go do that.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.